While you guys are at home, we're going to do a read aloud of parts of this book by Temple Grandin called Calling All Minds. Today, as you listen, record what you think a maker is. My road to becoming an inventor and animal scientist began when I was young. I attended classes, but I was more interested in horses than anything else. I was lucky because both my mother and school teachers encouraged me to learn everything I could about animals and science, and my teachers allowed it as long as I was on time for class and meals and took care of the horses. In addition to riding, that meant grooming, feeding, and mucking out the stalls. Summers spent at my aunt's ranch were incredibly important. I learned from my time with the cattle and horses everything I could about animals and how to communicate with them. Another influence was my grandfather. He was an inventor and one of my great role models. When I was a child, I asked him endless questions about the world, such as why do tides go in on out on the seashore? Another reason I became a scientist, which I didn't figure out until I was older, is that I'm a visual thinker. I organize the world through pictures, and my mind references words through a series of visual images. If someone says dogs, my mind calls up each dog I've ever seen. As I get older, I could picture how things worked in vivid detail, and eventually I could actually test equipment in my imagination. I can see things that clearly. It's considered normal to use a combination of visual and verbal skills to express thoughts and ideas, but in my experience, there is no normal. When I was diagnosed with autism as a child in the 1950s, most people didn't really know what it was or different ways it affected people. Now we say a person is on the spectrum, which means many things. They could have normal speech, or they could never learn to speak at all. For me, I was a late talker. I hated being hugged or held, and I was often in my own world. I had so much difficulty sitting that my mother used to say, "Go outside and run that energy out of you." I couldn't stand sudden sounds or any clothes that were too scratchy. I would become very agitated when my world changed even a little. Autism is not one size fits all. The more we learn about the spectrum, the more we understand different kinds of minds and how different kinds of thinkers are important, especially for things like creativity, innovation, invention, and making. I like to think of myself and other people who are different kinds of thinkers on a human spectrum. Though our brains may work in different ways, there is no limit to the kinds of contributions we can make. Teachers and parents worry about quirky kids who draw all day or the ones who care only about dinosaurs. They want kids to be well-rounded, but those single-minded kids may grow up to create and do incredible things if we encourage them to pursue their interest. At least that's what happened with me. My love of horses and cattle as a teenager became the basis of my career as an animal scientist. No question. However, the main reason I became an inventor is simple. Ever since I was a child, I always loved making things and working with my hands. If one of my projects failed, I would experiment for many hours until I got it to work. When I was young, my mother let me use every kind of material from around the house to create my experiments, from her old clothes and scarves to the cardboard inside my father's shirts when they came back from the cleaners. That cardboard was a treasure. I could make a million things with it, building blocks that would become forts, dioramas, models, and toys. I loved taking things apart and putting them back together, or making new inventions out of the pieces. You'll find a lot of projects in this book, but I also encourage you to experiment and design your own. Remember, instructions are only guidelines. Sometimes my students will come to me very upset because they followed the directions on an experiment perfectly, but it didn't produce the results they desired. I tell them the same thing. You have to experiment with the experiments. If I had to boil this book down to one message, it would be this: make things.
I'm sure you've been told by your parents many times to stop playing video games or to get off your iPad or smartphone. They probably say that you are destroying brain cells, or that you should be socializing or studying or practicing violin. All of that might be true, but I want you to put down your phone so that one day you might invent a better phone or video game, or a safer car, or a piece of equipment that will save lives. For all the amazing things that technology can do, if you want to create, you need to take things apart and put them back together with your own hands. Mathematician Dr. Grace Murray Hopper, the inventor of COBOL, the first non-numerical computer code, the one that most humans can understand, famously took apart every alarm clock in her parents' house. 7 clocks. She did that when she was a child. That's usually a sign that a kid is headed for the laboratory. That is, if he or she is encouraged instead of being punished for destroying the family clocks. My father's toolbox was more interesting to me than my mother's jewelry box. They both had little compartments, which I like to root around in, but the toolbox had all sorts of things I can play with. like adjustable wrenches, drills, and a folding yardstick. The yardstick was made of wood and had many hinges, so when it was closed, it looked like a gate. Partly opened, it looked like a fan, and fully opened, it became a sword to play with. A neighbor had a retractable measuring tape that could be pulled out 25 feet and had a mechanism to lock it at any length. But the part I loved was when you released the catch. The measuring tape went flying back into its body, swallowing itself up super fast like the retractable cords on some vacuum cleaners and dog leashes. I've always loved any gadget where rapid movement was involved. So I unscrewed the case and discovered that the measuring tape is connected to a flat metal spring that is wound around a post. That's how all retractable items work. You need to understand how a car works before you can invent a better one, which means you need to understand how pistons and engines and brake systems work by holding and feeling them. I'm not suggesting you take apart the family car, but if you love cars, you'll learn more by working as a part-time assistant at a local body shop than playing video games for hours in your family den. You may have to do a lot of sweeping up and menial jobs at first, but eventually you'll get to see under the hood of the car or under the hood where the real action is. There's no substitute for real-world experience in working with your hands, and there is no greater pride than seeing something you have created give pleasure or help people. When the first man landed on the moon, he planted an American flag on its surface to symbolically say, "We got here first." When inventors create something, they go to the patent office with their new creation to declare the same thing. This is a first. This is original. Patents protect inventors' work by preventing others from stealing both their ideas and often many years of work. The patents themselves tell a remarkable story of human ingenuity and serve a greater public good by preserving knowledge. If you think of a museum as a repository of art, the United States Patent and Trademark Office can be thought of as a repository of knowledge. I still love looking at patents to this day. In this book, we'll trace some of the most groundbreaking inventions from colonial America to the industrial age to our present technological age. We'll meet the first patent holder, as well as the youngest, the first woman, and the first African American to hold patents. Women and people of color were not originally allowed to hold patents, which is why many of their contributions have been lost to history. Their stories are all the more remarkable. When I was in elementary school, I had a book of inventors that I loved. It's long gone, but I can remember how I read it over and over again until the pages got thin. Fascinated by the inventors and the incredible things they made, I remember the entry for Thomas Alva Edison, who held 1,093 patents in the U.S. alone. I was inspired by his saying, "Genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration." I was also surprised to learn that some inventions happened by accident. Early on, I realized 3 very important things from my book of inventors. 1. There is usually a fascinating story of how things get made by connecting the dots. 2. Inventing takes hard work and requires patience. 3. Sometimes the most important discoveries are the results of serendipity. The future holds many crucial challenges, such as understanding the impact of climate change, curing diseases, and ending hunger. We need all kinds of minds if we are going to figure out how to adapt. If we lose the ability to make things, we will lose a whole lot more. We need people who can cast iron and chemists who can create new materials that are lighter and stronger than metals. We need new storytellers, filmmakers, musicians, and artists. And we need new technologies to explore the future, including a deeper and more complex understanding of the Earth and ocean and the galaxies. There is no better way to start than by making things of your own design. All the projects I have made when I was young contributed to the inventions I've made throughout my life, and they have given my life meaning. I hope these projects and the ones you will create will do the same for you.